said, how much this replicates it.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a general trope. Like, I just really love the pattern of that we're up here talking about NDEs. But, you know, we were walking over a crest of a hill in like this diffuse, like preternatural like light, like with the sun like arcing over the crest of the hill as we were walking up and like ascending toward it into like this misty light. I just thought it was just so poetic.
Oh, right,
It is poetic, yeah, it was.
Okay, so I took that as that was like literally 3 or 4 people who had gone exactly the same kind of. How many are exactly same?
Yeah, I mean, that is like that's extremely common, like walking into
the light.
Well, certainly walking into the light, or like going into the light, like that's one of the most universal dimensions for sure, but also like a natural environment.
Right.
As
okay.
well.
Because the ones I'm talking about back from when I was a kid and I started thinking about this stuff. It's like you go through a tunnel or into the light. What was it? Marianne, what's that?
Poltergeist.
Poltergeist.
Go to the light.
Go to the light, Carrie Ann. That's it.
Yeah.
Like that kind of stuff. So there's always so I see what you're saying now. We're walking up the hill with the lovely mist coming across, and it is.
Yeah.
Like these.
Have there been like?
I mean, it might be in memes and things like this film. I haven't seen that film. I don't know exactly what you're talking about.
Steven Spielberg. Poltergeist, the original Poltergeist.
But the light, going into the light like that, that's the meme of the memes of NDEs, right? But and you might consider that when people have these kind of near-death experiences, you know, we're so culturalized and enculturated into these kind of things that maybe that's just where people were getting this stuff from. But actually, it's probably more the other way around.
So
with some features, we have the experience, right, in near-death experiences, and that is what informs the culture, and then it just feeds back on itself.
Yeah. But are there like conferences where lots of people have had NDEs get together, and are there any kind of artist renditions of this is what I saw, and then someone else says that is exactly what I saw? Have there been comparisons like that between groups? And is it like overwhelming? Does it look overwhelmingly like these experiences were had by these people? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I mean that's anecdotal stuff like that. Well, that will just happen all the time. Like there's been actual systematic research. So like, yeah, these are all the features which happen. These are the general frequencies with which they all happen. These are the most common ones. These are the ones which might happen a bit less commonly, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're less like intimately associated with the NDE just because there's less, you know, they're less frequent. Those ones might be the ones which only happen in more the deeper of NDEs, because deeper NDEs are going to be the ones which happen less frequently, and like the most common ones just statistically are going to be the ones which may be a bit more like shallow, like the life review, for instance, isn't actually one of the most common, but it might feel like that when you're reading popular reports of NDEs and stuff, because they're some of the most dramatic parts of the NDE, which might happen in like more profound or like deeper NDEs, which might end up, you know, having like New York Times bestsellers like written about them and stuff. So but definitely the most common ones are leaving your body having a sense of peace, and then potentially going into the light via a tunnel, and then also meeting like deceased loved ones.
So does the light, as people reported, actually going into the light? Or
That's
is that
the
kind
last
of the
step,
event
isn't it?
horizon? That's like the final.
Don't go into the light.
So is that?
Yeah.
You can kind of liken that, I suppose, to like the 5-MeO experiences where you become the light. So are all these experiences where people experience the vaulted room, you know, the loved ones, etc. Is that like the prelude to moving through into that final stage?
Yeah, well, have you seen the film Soul?
Yes.
The animation?
Yeah.
So that depicts it really beautifully. I think like it's on like this escalator in the void towards this great sphere of this orb of light in the distance. and but he has like existential terror about it.
Yeah.
And then he like falls off the scales, and but this idea that to me it's extremely. I mean, it is
something to look forward to, really, isn't it?
Well, it is the mystery.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like an ancient mysteries. It's like, well, what is this final point? And whenever I think about, and it's interesting how your mind just tries to comprehend and contemplate this stuff. It's like when I think about the final end stage of death in a kind of, just more casual way of like thinking about this kind of thing. It's just an automatic notion of just an end point of light, of like pure light, and like, is that an intuitive thing? Is that an encultured thing? But yeah, I mean, like again, in one of these COVID NDEs, actually, a similar thing was kind of referenced that, where it was peculiar. It was like this guy, this individual who met human beings in Hawaiian shirts, that then. So it was like this kind of paradisal kind of environment, and this individual was just questioning everything. Like, well, where am I? What is this place? Who are you? And these other, human beings that they met they were just giving the impression that they kind of had this knowledge, this like kind of transcendent knowledge of like the mysteries that they were privy to after having died themselves or whatever, and now are facilitating it for somebody else. Let's say, that might be kind of context of what's happening. But this individual was still like on that journey. But then these other guys pointed to the skies, and that was their answer. It was like just like pure white light, like the brightest light that this person could have ever comprehended, and that's what they gestured at as what was the answer to their questions. And there's another similar report, like Jeffrey Kripal is like a scholar of religions, and he was saying that it was a very mirroring thing actually. It was the near-death experience. I was like in this mountainous environment, and was with these other entities, and there was again, like from these entities, like this gesturing toward the light beyond the peaks of the mountain, and that they're in a holding space or a space that mirrored Earth, because they obviously these spaces are curated in some way for us, because if you think about extraterrestrial life, for instance, like, why shouldn't they be able to have a near-death experience? Like, obviously, if we're biological beings and we go through this biological process, which correlates with having this other, otherwise transcendent experience, you could well imagine that they might have their own parallel, but they're not. But they'll go to their own perfect, idealized mirror image, let's say, of their own planet, that world which they immediately and evolutionarily kind of associate with like life-givingness, so that might be what makes most sense to emerge in their own like experience of like their like heaven, let's say. So we might be, so this individual, for instance, in their NDE, when they saw the mountain peaks, like that, it's this it might be an engineered space, as we were kind of saying before, or a kind of materialization of their own unconscious as to like what is like the perfect environment, but it's still not the kind of be all and end all. It's like there was still this reference to like this ultimate light, whatever the fuck that is.
Have you, just on a bit of a tangent, have you watched The Good Place?
A bit.
Right. So that's, if you imagine that being like a long version of the NDE. Yeah. The right.
Yeah, exactly.
Of,
you're going to spoil it for everybody.
I better not spoil it. But there's I mean, if you watch all the series,
yeah,
right,
just ends up in the light.
There doesn't wind up in the light, but there's a clear ending to it, which you think, that's, and it's not the light. So I'm not ruining it, but there is a definite similarity.
But there's some like culmination.
There is there is.
Well, I think I'm glad you actually brought that up in that way, because one thing I really did want to mention actually about the COVID NDE thing in reference to that, because we're talking about the light, but the light being some like the finality, some closing to the cosmic like narrative, and so this other individual that I managed to come across, who had an NDE from COVID, who is an artist from the US, and had like, you know, your kind of classic NDE, but then at the end he was describing his kind of interpretations of what it meant, but not necessarily just for him, but on a kind of cosmological scale, about the importance and specialness like of life itself, and like what the process of life really means, and that, I mean, in his words, if I can remember correctly, it's about organisms, and that that there may well be like this deliberate perseveration of organismic life, you know, and that things will inevitably complexify such that life will get to this point of like ultimate development, which he then, you know, contextualized as like kind of a growth toward a heavenly like experience, and it was really reminiscent of loads of, you know, of conversation that's already been had between different thinkers, like from more of like a psychedelic perspective, like Terence McKenna and the transcendental object at the end of time, and then you have a near-death experience. So like one of the pioneers, Ken Ring, who wrote the Omega Point, or heading toward Omega, and again this is from his research of NDEs, who might not in so specific and explicit of ways as this NDE that I mentioned, talking about this final end goal that the whole of the cosmos is like evolving inexorably like towards, but they all point towards it, that there's a, and some might, you know, couch it in more like obvious like Christian teleological ways of like, yeah, like the coming of the kingdom of heaven and things like that, but that there's some kind of evolution of consciousness that NDEs might be a part of, but are themselves just reflecting that is happening at large. And obviously that kind of comes back into this general like new age like cosmology and everything, but Ken Ring himself actually got this idea of the Omega Point from Teilhard de Chardin, who was a, you know, Jesuit priest who wrote for the phenomenon of man, and like had this idea of the new sphere, and that again was kind of similar in influence by Henri Bergson, who like wrote The Creative Evolution, and this whole concept that we're actually going somewhere, you know. But the Omega Point itself was actually, I think, originally coined by Frank Tipler, who wrote the physics of immortality, again about how there's actually legitimate structures in the universe that you can legitimately like call upon to give you this an impression, but with like rigor behind it, that there's a process which is unfolding and may actually it might not actually be able to be stopped. And there's another physicist, David Deutsch, and he kind of describes that as well, that there's no reason necessarily to say that this process, this like anti-entropic process, you know, that like what life is, will necessarily stop ever. Like that progress just might well continue, and that might be like embedded into the universe, into the kind of design of the universe. And so I think all of that actually, like from a perspective of the natural sciences, even, like it can come back into the phenomenology that we're even seeing in the near-death experience. Like there's another, just to wrap that bit up, there's a relatively recent book called The Romance of Reality, and he's And this guy Azarian, he's doing a similar thing of like leveraging complexity science, physics, neurosciences, mentioning psychedelic sciences, to give us this, to paint this picture that we've kind of been sold, and it's a really ingrained thing, like we've been sold this idea that the universe is empty, purposeless, will ultimately end in heat death, entropy is inevitable, so there can't be any, so in that sense there really isn't much margin at all for not falling into nihilism, really. And it's like saying that actually there are these anti-entropic processes, these processes of like syntropy and complexity, that now life has begun. There might not actually be a way necessarily to avoid a kind of ultimate omega point, and he refers to this idea of the omega himself. The
omega being the one. That's what it is. Isn't
Well,
it?
yeah. I mean, I guess it's like it is very deified in a way, or it brings that up because you have the alpha and the omega, and the alpha being kind of the beginning of time, the omega being the end.
Right,
So the omega is like the end times,
the end time.
which is teleological, and this is the point he brings in the book as well. It's like there might have been even less scientific reasons, more ideological reasons for this science to not have gained the traction earlier, because when you talk about teleology and the idea that there being some purpose or some drive, something that the universe is like working toward, it immediately feels religious, and people obviously from the scientific community kind of like
moved away
completely are aversive to that. But still, his idea is that it's still mechanistic. Like the universe is still, you can still consider it naturalistically, but you can actually still marry that and reconcile that with purposivity. Like if you think about life actually ultimately complexifying into maybe ever more complex systems, and then if you kind of run with that to like the logical extreme, it's like, what does that look like? It looks like God, which is the kind of what you say, like the one, like at the end of time, and ultimately I'm just kind of trying to interleave that with what we see from like the quality of near-death experiences themselves, and like these things can be really richly like dovetailed for like to work to start building up some kind of picture.
Yeah.
Might just be the coolest video we've ever shot.
We just got a little bit profound.
Especially in this environment. We've got
Kind of
like 3 minutes of card time left.
Oh, well, we'll wrap it up.
Amazing.
Then,
I'm going to not split that into 2 videos. It's fucking awesome. Especially with all that
I know.
just falling frost around us.
That was cool, that bit,
And I'm
wasn't
just
it?
watching
I
that
loved it when that kept coming down.
The mist is just pushing out to sea, look.
Yeah,
It's
just
fucking
opening up, isn't it?
I wonder whether or not you talk about everything complexifying and kind of speeding up. I'm wondering whether or not with this kind of coming AI revolution, whether or not with a leg up in intelligence, whether or not that we now see an acceleration of kind of scientific knowledge and a blending of these spiritual sort of these profound types of stuff that you're talking about there, whether or not we kind of see a real push forward in that.
Are we still recording?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think there's some weird interaction with what we're seeing now with the development of like burgeoning AI and AGI and what that means. But for even for a while, there's been more of like even religious type language which has been put to this development, like with Ray Kurzweil and stuff. Like he loves that, like the age of spiritual machines and the singularity is near and things like that. But so that's ultimately in the sphere of transhumanism, though. It's like, we're going to ultimately develop technology and develop AI. Like the singularity is going to happen of super intelligence, but that's going to inevitably mean or have implications for our mortality. The ultimate goal really of transhumanism is immortality via technology.
Yeah.
So when you consider that in this same picture of what we've been discussing now, it's like, how do they reconcile? It's like, is this process of life and afterlife and a mega point, and which might be tantamount to a deity, that can be considered like in a naturalistic lens, like this is just what's happening anyway.
Yeah.
Or there's the whole parallel transhumanism route, which is no, it's not already a thing that's embedded in our natural experience, and it's something that we need to invent. Like we're going to create AI, we're going to create the capacity technologically for mind upload or whatever it's going to be, and that is what's going to secure our digital afterlives. How can that? And even then, that with that same rhetoric, there's this idea of superintelligence and a god, but would be AI, an AI god, which is a lot in these kind of conversations. But how can they occur at the same time?
Yeah.
Is one right or is the other right? Can they both simultaneously be right? What would that look like?
I was thinking more along the lines of like super intelligence. If you create a super intelligence that is able to take huge leaps forward scientifically, let's say physics, and where we're sort of sitting looking from our little limited lens at what the afterlife may be, that super intelligence might just say, no, actually that's exactly what happens, blah, 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 and kind of take you 3 or 4 or 5 steps further than that, just purely from its mathematical and intelligence perspective. It's just that's exactly how it happens, and then this and this and this and helps
you expedite the kind of process. I mean that's one way it might interact,
which is quite cool.
My thought was, if you become immortal by a digital upload, but your body still dies, and you have got a soul, then your soul will go to the place that it should, and then you're forever left in hell in this digital fucking...
That's a massive paradox I've thought about as well. It's like, what
if
do we
at
do
some
with that?
point you're digital and you realise that you could have just gone to a better place?
But then, then you're kind of...
You're split anyway.
Yeah,
I understand that. But
that digital version of you is just a digital version of you, but then it might have its own consciousness and its own deep old rabbit hole, that one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean it's similar to like the cloning kind of concept, or like these like, paradoxes. But I did have a dream actually really recently, just like kind of linking to that, about being a cyborg. I suddenly became a cyborg, like I was a transhuman, and I decided I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna upload my consciousness to a machine, and it was immediate utter regret, because as soon as I emerged into the machine, I became a mechanism. I still might have been conscious, but I felt all of my humanity like just drain out of me. Right. And I was just narrating as I was being this cybernetic like organism, of how like myopic I could have been to have sacrificed the miracle that was humanity, like despite its like weaknesses or foibles or whatever, for this thing, which even if it is forever, it wasn't what I was. It wasn't, in reality, like it wasn't human. And then I had this reverse thing of being able to come back out of being a cyborg, and all of my realness and my humanity like suddenly just re-emerge, and it felt exactly like a psychedelic experience. Like it was exactly
like coming back from DMT.
Yeah, exactly. It was like coming back into
flesh bag.
Well, but it was a transcendent thing, though. Is what I'm saying. It's like coming back into my humanity.
Relief.
Was actually like a come up in a psychedelic experience. It was like a sudden onrush of feeling, of emotion and sensation, and so it was kind of like this thing of that it reversed it, such that if you're just having a psychic experience, or whatever, you might think that the human is like the flesh bag and the mechanism, and then you suddenly have this like transcendent divine kind of experience. But in this dream, it was helping me see the other way of looking at that, which is that actually the being a human being is actually that which is utterly rich And if we were to sacrifice that for our like technological kind of fixations, then that would be the fall. You know, it would be a whole other epoch, you know, of our fall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
Epic.
That was,
Epic
wasn't it?
stuff. Yeah, cool. Right, should we wrap it there, guys?
Yeah. Let's sign it off.
That was
Good.
amazing, mate.
That was.
That was really good.
You're making that into 2, you're saying?
I want to make that into 2.
Is that still running? Or we need to do a like and subscribe and sign off, don't we?
Smash that button, as they say in the biz.
Right, so that was epic stuff. Pascal Michael. Smash that subscribe button. We'll see you in the next one.